Great, great, great. But still, let's keep them in our prayers. Uh, Brother Rick May had gone in, and they had a preliminary that had one stent that was completely blocked, couldn't be repaired. But after they got him in Friday, he has three that cannot be repaired. So he's operating on one now. So let's make sure we keep him in our prayers. It's great to see Tina here today, but she continues to have problems. Let's keep her in our prayers. Brother Terry, as he changes medicines back and forth, I talked to him a bit yesterday, and he just never knows when he's going to feel good or feel bad. They've kept a chart trying to figure out patterns of what makes him feel bad, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. So he just has good days and bad days. Brother Doug is still on a cane. Let's keep him in our prayers. Sister Dot with her eye problems. April, our granddaughter, they hadn't got the date firmed up yet, but it's going to be somewhere around the 9th, 10th, 11th, maybe of November. She will have to have knee surgery. She has a torn patella tendon. So the only way to fix it's do a little surgery on it. So I think that's it on the sick and injured. And it was great to see everybody here at the party last night. And I'm sorry? Oh, Kevin Moody. Yeah, he's still having issues. They think that he's on the road to recovery right now. They've got that stone out, and he had an issue with his neck, but they said that wouldn't set him back very far. So, and the Mayfields that lost Kay lost her dad. So let's make sure we keep the Mayfields in our prayers. Anything else? Oh yes. She's having an MRI tomorrow to see what's going on with her foot. So let's make sure we keep them in our prayers. Brother Jim, would you lead us in a prayer, please? The first thing we're going to do, if I can get the projector turned on overhead, is we're going to look at a map. And I'm going to turn my back to you because I didn't have time to fool with it. I decided after I was almost here that we needed to look at the map before we did anything else. So I didn't have time to do a bunch of transferring and everything on this map. So I'm going to turn my back on you, and we're going to go through and point out some of the locations that we will be talking about today and give you some rough ideas of distances. And that way, as we get into the study of the 4th chapter, I'm hoping this will help it make just a little bit more sense. The first place that's mentioned is Ebenezer. That will be right here, and that's where the Israelites camped, and then Aphek here. Now that distance is only about 2 or 3 miles away. Now you have to remember that back in the old days when people were fighting, they would actually set up their encampments within looking distance of each other. They didn't have the means to camp 10, 15 miles away and then go charging in. So they would actually camp real close to each other, and they could even look at each other. So this is where they were. Now, after they had captured the Ark of the Covenant, and we're going to go through all this in detail later, but they took it down to Ashdod. Ashdod is right here. Now that is roughly 40 miles away. Ashdod is one of the 5 capitals, lordships, whatever you want to call it, that the Philistines had. It was Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, and Gath, and one more, Ekron, that I can't spot it right offhand. But anyway, those are the 5 lordships. Now, after the Israelites were beaten, the one guy went back over here to Shiloh to talk to Eli. That's about 20 miles away. Now, what you're going to find out is that it said that he got there the same day. Well, with it being about 20 miles away, how do you suppose he got there on foot the same day, 20 miles away? You can cut it off now, son. I'm sorry? He ran really fast. Okay. He didn't have to run all that fast. They were in a lot better shape than back in those days than we are today, because we go everywhere by car. When I was young and walked just about everywhere we went, it wasn't unusual to walk 4 or 5 miles, do something, go back 4 or 5 miles. And with them being on foot, all you have to do is pick up your pace a little bit. And if you do for us military folks, if you do a quick march, you're roughly at 5 miles an hour on a quick march, 4 to 5 miles an hour, depending on how mean they are. So all you have to do is pick up your pace a little bit, and you can do a mile in 15 minutes. So if they were doing 20 miles, roughly 4 hours he could make it. So the defeat probably happened pretty early in the day. Now, if we'll go to chapter 4 of 1 Samuel, and starting with verse 1, it says, "The word of Samuel came to all Israel, and Israel went out against the Philistines to battle and pitched beside Ebenezer, and the Philistines pitched or set up camp at Aphek." And we just showed you that those two were very close together. Now, there's a little something about Ebenezer. I don't know, I didn't point it out, but if you notice that map, it had a little cross mark by it, a little plus sign. That means at the time of the battle took place, that's not what it was called. It was just a plain out there. If you go over later in chapter 7 of 1 Samuel, that is when Samuel names that location Ebenezer, meaning helper of stone or stone helper. And but that's where the battle took place, and that was, he named it roughly 20 years after the battle. But then when we go down to verse 2, the Philistines put themselves in array against Israel. And when they joined battle, Israel was smitten before the Philistines, and they slew of the army in the field about 4,000 men. Now, what does it mean to put the army in battle array? I'm sorry? Line up and go for it. Well, that'd be a lot of chaos if you just line up and go for it, wouldn't it? Well, there was some tactics involved. If you recall back in Joshua, and even earlier is talking about how God spoke to them and told them to divide up into 3 groups, and they set up a little strategy. So battle array just meant that they got prepared for battle in whichever formation that they were going to go in. We know they had chariots. Here we don't know if they used them or not, because all it says is battle array. So, you know, you can play all kind of mind games. The Romans, for instance, had a formation that they called the tortoise. The tortoise was basically the little group that they had together. The ones on the outside held their shields. The ones in front held their shields. The ones in the back and the ones in the middle held their shields over the top, so they could march in formation, and no matter how many arrows came their way, they were protected to a point unless one managed to get through. They also had what they call weak center formations or strong center formations. A weak center was basically let the center collapse, and then you outflank them on the sides and come in. So there was a whole mess of different ways that they could have done things. So just because we looking back over 2,000 years, roughly 3,000 years at this point, saying, well, they just went out there and started fighting each other, there was a system to the way they fought. But all we know is that the Philistines put themselves in a battle array and went out and they defeated the Israelites. Now, in verse 3, when the people were coming to the camp, the elders of Israel said, wherefore hath the Lord smitten us today before the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh unto us, that when it cometh among us, it may save us out of the hand of our enemies. Did they have a good idea? No? Why not? They had a lot of problems with it later on, but why did they have a problem with it? They weren't faithful. But they thought if they went and got the Ark of the Covenant, that's where God would be. And all they had to do was take the Ark of that Covenant out there, and God's with them. But as you say, later on, we learn that God had left them because they had not been good. They had actually been a little bit wicked. Now in verse 4, so the people sent to Shiloh that they might bring the ark. So they did what they could to get the ark there. I'm like Brother Terry now. I'm kind of new at using my computer to do this, so I'm going to be kind of slow. But in verse 5, when the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel shouted with a great shout, so that the earth rang again. So here they are. They send back to Shiloh, because that's where it was at this time. They brought the Ark of the Covenant. The people saw the Ark come into the camp, and everybody was overjoyed. We have the Ark. God is with us now. We're going to win this battle. What had they failed to do? Repent. They had not at anywhere along this lines gone to God in prayer and asked for God's help. They assumed that because they had that ark, that God was going to deliver them. They got the material, so God's there. We got the building. Is God here? Where's God? There's more than one, and we are worshiping him now. We're supposed to have him front and foremost in our thoughts. So he is with us if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. Okay. Verse 5 then says, well, that was that. And then the Philistines in verse 6 heard it, and they got kind of excited too. For what reason? Why did they fear? Exactly. They had seen what the Israelites had done when they had the ark before. So naturally they assumed, and well, we shouldn't assume anything, but they drew the conclusion that because they were excited and happy and knew the ark was there, now we got something to be afraid of. If we look down then at verse 8, they even said, woe unto us, who shall deliver us? These, the hand of these mighty gods, these are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. They made two wrong statements here. What are they? Gods, okay. And what was the other statement? Pardon? Right. But let's just go back to what you had said about gods. Now, some translations or some versions of the Bible have a little g instead of a large g here, meaning gods. There is only one God. Now, it was natural for them to assume gods because they had multiple gods, the Philistines. They wasn't true worshipers, so they had multiple gods. Baal, Ashtaroth, Dagon, for example. So it wouldn't be unusual for them to say gods when they were actually speaking of the one God. Yeah, I even heard it on TV not too long ago where somebody was talking about no matter which God you believe in, do this. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay. But in verse 9, somebody spoke up and said, "Be strong and quiet yourselves like men, O ye Philistines, that ye be not servants unto the Hebrews as they have been to you. Quiet yourselves like men and fight." That's a pretty good statement, isn't it? Hush your crying, be men. That's a pretty good pep talk. Got an analogy that Glenda will appreciate dealing with Bear Bryant many years ago in football. Alabama was playing a football game and they were 21 points behind at the halftime. Halftime, the boys went into the locker room expecting Bear Bryant to come in there and give them a royal. No Bear. Just about the time the bell rang at the halftime was over and they was to go back to the field, locker room door flew open. Bear Bryant stuck his head in and says, "Oh, excuse me, ladies, I thought this was the guys' dressing room." That's all he said. They came back and won the game. Why? Why did they win the game? Had he put fear in them? He had shamed them and angered them, hadn't he? So now they come back. So here, which would you rather go into battle with? Somebody that will fight to the end or somebody that will try to be calculated and if they're going to lose, run? Would you rather go to battle with somebody that is brave or somebody that's a coward? Who wins most battles? Numbers don't necessarily always add up and make you the stronger. It's your will to fight that makes you stronger. And that's what's taking place right here is they was telling the Israelites, get it together, be men. Let's go do the job. Verse 10, and the Philistines fought. Now, y'all will catch me calling the Philistines, and Philistines. I interchange that word, not on purpose. It's just whatever rolls off my tongue. But in verse 10, and Israel was smitten, and Israel fled every man to his tent. There was a great slaughter, and 30,000 fell. Why did the Philistines beat the Israelites when the Israelites had the Ark of the Covenant? God was not with them because they had been wicked. Verse 11 tells us that the Ark of the Covenant was taken, that the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas were slain. It also tells us in verse 12 that there ran a man of Benjamin out of the army, came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes rent and earth upon his head. Now, what does it mean to have your clothes rent? We'll separate them. What is symbolically of your clothes being torn? Pardon? Separation or beaten down. What about dirt on your head? Embarrassed, shame, same type of thing there. Humiliation. You could put all of that into place. And there's certain locations that even do similar things today. But here, all of that was taking place. And verse 13, it goes back to Eli, and Eli was sitting on a seat by the wayside watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. What about his two sons? Don't mention that he was fearful for his sons. Well, he's going to get the report that they're dead. At the same time, he gets a report that the ark has been captured. They're not dead. Well, they're dead, but he don't know it quite yet. But here, Eli, he's 98 years old, almost blind. He hears the noise in the city, which really, I guess, means that the guy, the runner, the messenger that came in, as soon as the messenger come in, people of the city started getting around him, and he started telling tales. And then Eli heard what was going on, and so he starts asking, "What's going on?" And you got to put that in perspective. Even today, if you see somebody right now, if we're sitting here and we see somebody walk in the back door that we don't know, when they start looking around, what's going through your mind? Who are they? What they want? What they need? So here, when they see somebody coming into the city by themselves, a runner, messenger, they're going to go find out what's going on. And that's what was taking place here. Like I said, he was 98 years old. And in verse 17, it says, the messenger answered him and said, Israel is fled before the Philistines. There are 4 very important statements in this one verse. Israel is fled before the Philistines. Now, put yourself in the place of the Israelites at this point. God had escorted them out of Egypt. God had been with them in the wilderness. God had provided for them a way to conquer a land. God was on their side. They were the favorites. Now the message is coming down. Them nasty old Philistines have beaten them. They've run. That's quite a statement in itself, isn't it? But then look at the second statement. Great slaughter. Not only have they been beaten, turned tail and run, there has been a great slaughter. Many of them have been killed. Now Eli hears that Hophni and Phinehas, his 2 sons, are dead. They got killed in the battle. How much more can a 98-year-old man stand, even today?
Well, he knew his 2 sons were going to die.
Oh, yes.
I think that was on his mind, but the Ark of the Covenant, it was the ultimate possession, I guess you would call it, that they had. And once that was gone, hope left.
Yeah. Well, and he had not only known that his 2 sons was going to die, he knew he was going to die. It was just going to be a little bit in the future, and the future is now. So, and then the last part of that verse, it says, the ark of God is taken. I sort of like the way the guy delivered the message. He started, and everything built on the other as far as Eli was concerned. Israel fled, great slaughter. His sons are dead. And now the ultimate prize, the Ark of the Covenant, has been taken. Verse 18, then, when it came to pass, when he made mention of the Ark of God, that he fell off the seat backwards and by the side of the gate, and his neck brake, and he died. For he was an old man and heavy, and he had judged Israel for 40 years. So he didn't know how he was going to die, but as Brother Jim said, when the Ark of the Covenant was mentioned, the Ark of God had been taken by a Gentile nation, pagans, whatever other term you want to use. They now had possession of the Ark of the Covenant. That was what tipped the scale and destroyed him. He just fell over and broke his neck. Now, when it comes to judging Israel 40 years, the Septuagint says 20, but all other manuscripts say 40. No need to get picky on that portion, because as we've gone over time and again in these classes, trying to date things is very difficult, because sometimes they shared for a while, sometimes they ruled individually, sometimes they ruled two different locations. And when you get to the Egyptians, they even had name changes. Sometimes they had 6 or 7 or 8 names that you had to try to keep track of as to the dating. So, but he was a judge of Israel when he died. Verses 19 through the rest of the chapter deal with his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife. She was with child almost at time for the birth of the child. And when you get down to verse 20, it says, and about the time of her death, the woman that stood by her said unto her, fear not, for thou hast borne a son. But she answered not, neither did she regard it. And then in verse 21, she named the child Ichabod, saying, the glory is departed from Israel. Her husband had been killed. Her father-in-law died. But what was her concern other than those two things? What was the glory that departed Israel? Was it her father-in-law, the judge? Exactly. So the Ark of the Covenant, Ark of God, had left Israel, and we don't know what made her most sad, her husband, her father-in-law, or the Ark, but those three things all combined. When she found out about that, without speculating, she could have, we don't know that she was sick and don't know that the childbirth is what killed her, but you can just imagine that the things that women go through during childbirth, if they've got these 3 additional burdens laid on them at that same time, she did not have the heart to live, because it plainly says there that she didn't regard it. She wasn't paying any attention to it. But shortly after the birth of that child that she named Ichabod, she died. Any questions or comments on chapter 3? Chapter 4. Hope is gone. That's it. Chapter 5. In verse 1, it says, and the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. And remember, we had talked about Ashdod being at least a 2-day journey away, being 40 miles, especially if you're carrying something, carting it, trying to be careful with it. So that's where they took. In verse 2, when the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. Who's Dagon? An idol, false god, idol. Anybody know what Dagon would look like if you were to see an image of him? Fish god. In other words, the body and legs were fish. The arms, hands, and head was either man or woman, depending on which way they wanted to do it. But that was one of the images that the Philistines worshipped. It says in verse 3, and when they of Ashdod arose early on the morrow, I mean, next day they got up early in the morning, it was probably their custom, as you read through here, it was probably their custom for them to go and pray at the side of the pagan god first thing in the morning, because why else or how else would they know? I mean, you take us, we meet here twice a week, 3 times during the week, but Sundays and Wednesdays. If we're not up here working or doing planning or other things, if something happens on Monday, when are we going to find out about it? Wednesday. So apparently they would go there daily. But anyway, he had fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. Now, I take that to be significant, because he didn't just fall down, but where did he fall down? They placed him beside Dagon, but where did he fall? In front of, on his face. And you get into some symbolism here, but what does it generally mean when something is on its face on the earth in front of someone else or something else? They are prostrating themselves, they are humbling themselves before that. So here, with that image, it is though that when they walk in, they find out that their God is now laying prostrate in front of the God that they had just put there. Now, why did they put the ark of the Lord in the temple with Dagon to start with? Sorry? Not exactly. Pardon? As a trophy is a good way to put it, because they always took their what they captured and put it in their temples. Later on, when we get to Saul in chapter 31, when they defeat Saul, where do they put his armor? In the temple of Ashtaroth, another god. When David defeated Goliath, where did Goliath's sword go? In the temple. So it was customary for them to do that, because they're thinking that their God was the one that helped them with the victory. So now they're taking it in to give to them. Verse 4 says, and when they arose early on the morrow morning. Now this is the second morning that Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands are cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump of Dagon was left to him. The stump meaning the fish part, and all the human parts were now broken off. So here again is a lot of symbolism. And it happened at the threshold. What's a threshold? The entry at the door. We have some customs in our country today where when a couple gets married, what happens at the threshold? Totes her if he's able. Why? Tradition, right? Okay, so here we are, and it's at the threshold that this takes place. Pardon? She may have to carry him. I'm not going to comment anymore. But with it happening at the threshold, the next verse, verse 5, says that therefore neither the priest of Dagon nor any that come into Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon and Ashdod unto this day. Why would they now not walk on that threshold? Okay. In their way of looking at it, by that breaking up and all happening right there, now that made that spot a holy spot. Now, as the Christian church, the church of Christ, the church that Christ died for, his church, from that time period into the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century, as things started getting way off course, let's say, the Catholic Church is the one that branched off and took it the farthest off course. And in those centuries, it was not uncommon for men to bow down and kiss the threshold or the doorpost as they entered, because they are now entering a holy place. Is there anything holy about this building? It is drywall, metal, and wood, wiring, and electricity. It's a comfortable place for the church, the people to meet, but there is nothing holy about a building. But that was their thinking. So to get in, they would either make sure they stepped across or even jumped across. You can maybe, I don't know, this is probably a stretch, but why did Eli sit at the entrance? Maybe to punish as if they didn't do it right. Like I said, that's a stretch. Verse 7, when the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, they said, the ark of the God of Israel shall not abide with us, for his hand is sore upon us and upon Dagon our God. Now, I find this verse just very intriguing. They've realized that they shouldn't have taken that ark because it didn't belong to them. And it says that God is angry with them, but what does it say next? God is angry against their God. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm sitting here thinking, if I believe in this God and this one over here is whooping up on him, I don't want anything to do with this one. I want to go to the winner, right? But verse 8, so they sent therefore and gathered all the lords of the Philistines unto them and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they answered, let the ark of God of Israel be carried about unto Gath. And they carried the ark of the God of Israel there. So they didn't want it in their city anymore because it brought bad things and not good things. Verse 9 says, after they had carried it about, the hand of the Lord was against the city with a very great destruction, and he smote the men of the city, both great, small and great, and they had emerods in their secret parts. Anybody got a footnote in your Bible that tells us what an emerald is? Pardon? Tumors? Well, back in the old days, we used to call them piles. Today, we would refer to them as hemorrhoids. If you go into the book of Psalms, you will see it referred to as they were bothered in their hindermost parts, meaning their private areas. So that's what this is all about. There wasn't only a great destruction, but he made them absolutely miserable on top of that. So verse 10 says, therefore they sent the ark of God to Ekron. And it came to pass, as the ark of God came to Ekron, the Ekronites cried out. They didn't want it either. Nobody wants that ark right now. because the only thing that's coming about when that ark is there is bad things. Verse 11 says, so they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of God of Israel and let it go again to his own place, that it slay us not and our people. For there was a deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of God was very heavy there. Now, I had mentioned that there were 5. When we get into the next chapter, Wednesday night, we'll start looking at the 5 things. But if somebody would turn to chapter 6 and verse 17 of 1 Samuel, 6:17. Because right offhand, I can't remember the 5th one. It's Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, Gath, and I think it's Ekron, but pardon? Ekron, okay. So those are the 5 locations, main headquarters for the Philistines. And so they got the 5 lords or the 5 rulers or the 5 leaders together for them to try to decide what was going to take place. Verse 12 says, and the men that died not were smitten upon the emerods, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. So these people thought they had done a good thing. They had defeated the Israelites. They had captured the grand prize. Only what's the problem with them capturing the grand prize? Pardon? It wound up being a curse to them because of what reason? You're correct, but what reason? They angered God because they did not worship God. They worshiped false gods. They worshiped idols. So it sort of is like, just because I have multiple Bibles in my house, that I should be protected. God's on my side. I've got his material. But that only works if what? I open it and read it and study it and obey it. Otherwise, it's just a book on the table collecting dust. So here, with that ark being the prize that it was, God was going to take vengeance on anyone that did not use it properly. And so it did belong back in the hands of the Israelites. Luke has already gone out, counted, about to ring the bell. We won't get into the next chapter. We'll leave that for Terry Wednesday night. But is there any questions on anything that we have studied thus far? Victory turned into defeat. There was even the expression that we used about Vietnam doing that we snatched defeat out of the mouth of victory. Kind of backwards, but it was applicable. We won't go there today. But yeah, they had won the war, they had won the battle, but due to one mistake, now they wind up on the losing end. Anything else? Questions, comments, add-ons, subtractions? Brother Golden. Yes, sir. I have read that, but the reason I don't believe it was that I believe it was what I had mentioned is when you get to the book of Psalms, and there's another place where it's talking about in the hindermost parts, and the bubonic plague was a total. And however, as you say, when we get later on, they were overrun with mice, but that was just another aggravation they had on their hands. I think it was 2 separate things. I don't think one caused the other, but yes, sir. Thank y'all very much for your comments and your attention.